Hi, this is Ren.
And this is KC.
And this is All Walks of Film.
And today we're talking about the movie It Follows, which we actually saw last week, but it took us a while to get around to recording this because over the weekend I actually got my foot run over by a driver. Like a car went over my foot and nothing is broken, and now things are sort of picking up and we're back to normal and I can walk now, so we're getting back in the swing of things.
Yeah, definitely.
Snap, snap.
So today we're talking about the film that just came out recently called It Follows, which is a horror film, ish.
It's being praised by everyone. Ren was insistent, we have to go see this movie. It's 96% on Rotten Tomatoes. It's supposed to be amazing. And for anybody who hasn't seen the movie and who is interested in seeing the movie, I have one thing to say, and it's not a spoiler. But I would call It Follows, the most boring horror movie in over a decade.
Well, it depends on like what you're into. If you're really a cinematography nut, It Follows might be a movie that you could enjoy because
if you like, jerking off over different models of cameras and things like that, then maybe. Because the cinematography was competent in this movie, but it was so, narcissistically in love with itself that I was just kind of like, okay, God, you can move a camera. Jeez.
Yeah.
And here's the thing. I can appreciate very good cinematography, but this was competent cinematography. It was fine.
Yeah, I mean, it served its purpose. But, so the movie is about this sort of STD that...
Yeah, it's an STH, a sexually transmitted horror, or sexually transmitted haunting or something.
Yeah.
It's all ridiculous.
Yeah, so basically, you have sex with somebody, then once you've had sex with them, there will be an entity that follows you, and these entities can look like your parents, they can look like old people. There's a lot of different things that they can look like. But basically, there are people chasing after you, at a really slow pace. So it's kind of like a zombie movie, except like the zombies don't really do anything.
Yeah, and it's only one zombie. That's the other thing. There's only one of it. So it's a zombie movie with one zombie.
And we know that it's not a zombie movie. It's just like it follows the speed and the typical body behavior of a zombie.
Yeah, and they specifically set up, it walks, it doesn't run. And they say very early on, it can take the form of somebody you love, and I think that it does that just to mess with you. But they don't really play around with that. They utilize it twice in the whole movie, and neither times does it have any sort of emotional or, mindfucky effect or anything. Especially since the first time, it takes the guise of a person who is in the scene, and which one's the real one and which one is the it that follows. So there's just no tension to it at all.
Yeah.
Because you know which one's which. It's not messing with you.
Yeah.
And then the other time, you don't even know that it's somebody who's related to the main character until after the scene's over. Way afterwards.
Yeah, and I honestly think the praise for this movie is coming from the fact that there are literally no non-poltergeist horror movies coming out. Everything has to do with a possession or some entity haunting a house, and this film's a little bit different, so people are literally lavishing over that.
I kind of think people are just it's basically like an art house horror movie, and maybe it's just people who are not aware of anything else like that, or just it's amazing.
There are legitimate critics that are claiming this film to be amazing, which last year, same thing happened with Under the Skin. There was a movie that everybody liked that I didn't get the love for.
Well, I actually can kind of understand the love for that more than this.
Well,
which I'm not saying it's better.
At least it looks different. At least there is...
Yeah, at least there... Here's the other thing about this movie. For one thing, I have no idea why it was rated R, and I'll get into that later, but the other thing is, in It Follows, there is one weird-looking image at all in the first 5 minutes But there is no surreal imagery. There's no horror imagery. There's nothing that looks like otherworldly or freaky or messed up. There is nothing like that in this film. At least in Under the Skin, there are those CGI scenes that the director had nothing to do with that are just like very 2001 Space Odyssey abstract. Like, there's something to it.
Yeah.
But It Follows was just visually, like, there was no...
Well...
There was no imagery to it.
Yeah, and also the movie, like, I can see, like, if you're into the 80s synth music that was used very prominently in the movie Drive, you might forgive the movie a little bit more. I know they used it in The Guest recently as well. But, yeah, people are just really lavishing over movies that are like that.
Yeah, and this movie is also... Another weird thing about this movie is the time period thing, because you were saying it was in the 80s, which, yeah, it seems like they have old-fashioned TVs, there's no cell phones. I thought the cars looked really new, but the other thing is that there's a character in it who's like a bookworm, but she doesn't read books. She reads like a little Kindle that's shaped like a seashell. And after the movie, I spent a long time trying to find out what that is, and I couldn't find anything. So my conclusion is they handmade, specifically for the movie, a specialty prop that's an electronic Kindle that looks like a seashell in a movie that was supposed to take place in the 80s. Like, why? Why did you put why did you have, like, this one weird object that doesn't add anything to the story or the motifs or the imagery and just wrecks the timeline? I don't think that it was supposed to be in the 80s anyway. I think it was supposed to be like sort of rural suburbia, but it was just very odd.
80s movies are slow paced, but they're not this slow paced.
Boring. God. There was no tension, nothing scary. I was never once on the edge of my seat for any reason.
To be fair, I hate to say that, like, if you scare easy, this movie might get you, but, like, it honestly, yeah. It attempts to be a deconstructionalist horror film, you know, talking about, like, oh, well, sex is always a bad thing in horror movies. Like, there's this puritanical...
You know, the slut gets killed first.
Yeah, and this movie basically, instead of doing that, it's like, well... In order to stay alive, you have to essentially be promiscuous.
But it's strange because it's not promoting sexuality either, and especially since none of the sex in it is...
Oh, the sex is so awkward in this movie.
Yeah, every single sex scene is the most, like, we're doing it for the first time ever kind of sex. Yeah, like, very timid and shy, and, like, you don't even really want to look. It's just kind of awkward. Yeah. You know, you just kind of feel embarrassed for them. So it's not even like she's spreading it around or something. You know, it's not like that. So it's not promoting sexuality. But it is also saying, like, dude, don't sleep with somebody even if you've been dating him for a while and you think, like, it's going really well, because then he will strip you of your underwear and tie you up and throw you in the middle of the street and leave you there and just act like an asshole the whole time.
Yeah.
Like, that guy, whether he was schizophrenic or just a dick or what, he was an asshole to her for no good reason.
Oh, like, but he was scared of this thing.
Like, he was scared of this thing, but dude, you chloroformed her and tied her to a chair in the middle of nowhere and kept her tied up and threw her in the middle of the street on the ground in front of her house in her underwear.
Yeah.
Like, in her granny panties, too. Like, and you know those were, like, her nicest underwear, too.
Yeah, that was interesting, because normally in horror films you see, you know, women wearing lingerie, even though they're virgins. And
well, you do at the beginning of the movie with the chick who is at home alone with her dad wearing silk PJs and red high-heeled pumps. At home. Just chilling. Like, what? Why is she wearing heels? And it's so you know, oh, she was a slut. That's why she had what was coming to her. She was promiscuous.
Yeah, but, you know, in the film, in order to stay alive, you have to be a slut.
Yeah, exactly. Basically. Like, but the message was very mixed. I just don't know what to take away from it. But the other thing too, I just don't really understand why it was rated R, is because it was there is some full frontal nudity, but it's the it that follows sometimes has its tits hanging out. Sometimes you see like the front of the, you see some pubes.
You see some merkins.
You see some merkins. You see one really old dude, full frontal nudity. But if you took all of the nudity and added it together, it would be less than a minute's worth of footage. There's no cursing. There's no blood. There's no guts. There's no gore.
Wait, there was no cursing? I thought there was cursing.
Well, not like more than PG-13. It wasn't like motherfucker everywhere. You know what I mean? Well, it wasn't South Park.
Well, you could say that there was rampant sex in the movie. Like, there was a lot of sex.
But it was all so awkward, and you don't see anything, and they're all having sex with all of their clothes on all the time. Like, really? Nothing about it. I walked out of that movie, I swore I had just seen a PG-13 movie, and I thought that was part of it, was they had tried to make a PG-13 horror movie. Because there was no gore, there was no disturbing imagery, there was barely any nudity, there was barely any sex, there was almost no cursing. Like, it was so tame that I thought it was supposed to be like PG-13.
Yeah, and I guess some of the people going into it that liked it probably didn't want to see something like that. Like, they're critics, they have to see it, and then they're like, oh, well, this isn't a movie that has excess this and that, so they wind up appreciating the film a little bit more than they probably would have if there was more.
Yeah, so they like it more for what it is than what it isn't than what it is.
Yes. That and the cinematography. I think that some people are just lavishing over the cinematography and not really getting the context of the film. Because I've talked to some people that really do believe that the film doesn't have a lot to say.
Yeah, I don't think it has a lot to say about anything, and more than just sort of trying to play around with not indulging in some tropes of horror movies and then overindulging in other tropes. Like, it doesn't bring anything new to the table, really. Yeah,
I mean, it seems to be addressing some of the issues in horror films, which, I know that it's attempting to be a deconstructionalist horror film. I just don't think that it deconstructs enough.
Well, the other thing, too, is just the "it's" that follows is so vague and so non-threatening and uninteresting and unoriginal that I had to assume it has to be an allegory for some sort of social issue, and I just have no idea what.
Well, I think it's a social allegory for slut-shaming,
But it's just so awkward about the way it handles sexuality, even though that's the whole point of the movie, that I don't know what I'm supposed to take away from it. Or maybe more importantly, I don't take away anything from it.
I think the fact that the director draws a lot of attention to issues that he suggests a lot of things but doesn't give you a lot to chew on. Most of this would be your own interpretation. The director is David Robert Mitchell. He worked on The Myth of the American Sleepover. I think that's the name.
And for a horror movie, that's not really something where you need to be subtle. I'm not saying you can't have subtle horror movies. That's not my point. But I'm saying if you really wanted to have a powerful allegory, a horror movie is a good platform for that, because you can go in all sorts of directions you usually can't go in other genres.
Yeah, horror usually... One of the things that I like about horror as a genre is horror goes where a lot of other movies are too afraid to go.
Yeah, which my favorite example of that right now, and will be for a long time, I guarantee it, is The Babadook. And yeah, a big part of the reason why I was disappointed in this is because, we just saw The Babadook. And that was one of my top 2 favorite movies from last year. And all the reviews were just, oh, this is supposed to be this amazing new horror movie, blah, blah, blah. I did have high expectations for it, but it was just so meh.
I won't say that the movie is bad, but I won't say that this is a movie to rush out to the theaters to watch either. I mean,
I agree.
I don't get I don't understand the love for this movie the way that it's being praised.
Yeah, right, and for me more than anything else, I just don't understand I've heard that people are legitimately scared by this movie, and I'm so flabbergasted as to why. I can understand appreciating it for the cinematography.
I guess they just
or the
don't watch
production.
horror
The production's
movies.
great.
I guess they don't watch horror movies. Like, I don't get, and maybe I've become desensitized because I've watched films like Serbian Film and Salo and all kinds of stuff, but I don't get it.
I don't get it either. Like, I don't know what there is to be frightened by. But you told me when we came out of this, which one would I rather see again, this movie or Under the Skin? And I would rather see this movie again because Under the Skin was painful.
That's because
and this movie's not painful.
Yeah,
it's not
this
bad.
movie has enough dialogue and enough going on with the camera that you can enjoy it even if you're not scared by it or really enraptured by it.
Mm-hmm. And the production is pretty good, and I like one of the actors that's in the movie. I was okay with the characters. Like, the characters for a horror film, like a blockbuster-y horror film, were more substantial than most, but not as substantial as the best. Let's put it that way.
I think really the praise of this movie is coming from what it isn't.
That's not enough for me. I'm not going to like it for what it doesn't indulge in.
And, especially since, like, horror is, like, not a genre that's really big right now. Of course, you have your horror fans and you have The Walking Dead on TV, which is more of a drama than anything.
Mm-hmm.
Horror is kind of at least in the theaters, is kind of a dying genre.
Yeah, and especially critically, there's so much backlash against the genre of horror films, and it's if there is a good movie in the horror genre, then it transcends the horror genre and it's not part of it, which I don't agree with, but that's something a lot of people are saying, is that it's not even a horror movie if it's a good movie. And it's because really some of the shittiest movies that are coming out are horror movies.
Critically, horror movies don't really receive a lot of praise. I mean, probably the most successful horror movie ever is Silence of the Lambs, which, I can't really qualify as a horror film because it's more of a thriller than anything else.
Yes, I agree with that. So, yeah, no spoilers this one, so we can kind of put that up front. No spoilers.
Yeah, we didn't spoil the movie because, like, honestly, there's not much to spoil for this movie.
Yeah, I mean, we could sit down and tell you everything about it, but since it's so meh, it's just
Yeah, if you disagree with us, let us know.
If this did scare you, please tell us why.
Yeah, if it scared you, let us know why. If we didn't get something out of the movie, please tell us what that is.
Oh, actually, speaking of that, I will say the one thing I do give this movie is they were very clear about a lot of things. It did a lot to visually tell you things that I didn't tell you with the dialogue. In a very clear way, not in a way of like, oh, if you notice in this particular point way in the background, this sort of thing. No, like, they're very upfront and clear. And I thought that was actually a good point to the movie.
All right, stay tuned to us next time.
See ya.
Thanks for listening.